All right, hello and welcome back everyone to the Game Dev Show. This week we're here with Storey, Andrew, and Pal, and we're going to be talking about some of the interesting things that Storey was just sharing with us right before we went live around building core systems and now some UI framework stuff as well. So if you're a Unity game dev, this should be a fun, interesting episode. And if you've got questions and you're here with us live, make sure to ask them in the chat and we'll try to answer as many as possible as well. So welcome everybody. You guys want to say hello? Andrew, Powell want to say hi before we let Storey catch us up?
Yeah.
So Jason, where have you been? How's everything going? And what do you want to share about some of this new stuff?
Well, I was on the Moon Secret Project. Can't talk about it too much, but I will say now that I'm back, I have done a few Unity things I can kind of noodle about and talk about. To give a little bit of context to start, I was going over my Git repo and I realized that my starter project, for people who don't know, I have it's a really simple 3D scene starter project that I've been using even for my own prototypes, which is just it's a slightly modified KCC character controller in a little scene with some Pro Builder blocks and a little bit of color grading, and it's just sort of like a decent enough starting point for doing a quick walk around scene. And I was looking at it and realized that it's like 3 years old or something. And I'm like, okay, well, I don't use that version of Unity anymore. I don't use some of the tools the way I used to do it over there as I used to. And I've also been in a few other Discords like Git Amends, and I was kind of watching what people are doing, and I'm thinking, there's some systems I want to change or talk about or modify. And so I've been kind of playing around with a few various ideas, basically.
Anything that you want to share now or anything you want to save it all?
No, I guess I can go through a few things. The first thing I think I was talking to you about was the input system. So I'm like everyone else these days, I pretty much use the Unity's new input system. I still think Rewired has better per controller support because it can like literally tell you right down to the exact controllers and lots of per configurations. But the new Unity system is, I say new at this stage, but the Unity input system is sufficiently good that honestly, it's good enough for 99% of cases, and it's something that I prefer just using as much native stuff as possible. So I was using that, and I wanted to just tackle the whole prompt icons thing, finally for once, because I've done it 2 or 3 times in different ways, and they work, but they're a little bit tedious, or I don't know, they don't always work for every type of controller the way I want to.
And prompt icons, like the pop-ups telling them what button to hit when
press X, press triangle.
Like you walk up to the door the first time and it tells you hit whatever, and then that could be X or A or circle or whatever.
And then the question becomes, it's actually a harder problem than you think, because you're saying, okay, which device are they using? And then what sprite do you provide for that particular icon? And then of course, if the device changes or disconnects or they switch to the keyboard, what is it for that? And then there's like the values for it, like is it being pressed or held, or all these different parts. And not to mention that there's first-party controllers and third-party controllers. What do you do in the case of a Xbox controller, or if you do a third-party like the 8-bit Do controller, for example? And so I was like, how do I handle all of these cases in a way that I'm happy with? So I basically bought a bunch of controllers. I mean, I have like lots and lots of now various different controllers, and I just wanted to really see exactly what they register as and how they show up and what different providers and things they use.
Is there a big variance there?
You'd be surprised, yeah. So basically, a lot of them spoof themselves as particular first-party ones. And so what you'll notice is if you really dive deep into the controller, there's a controller type in the Unity input system, which tells you not only what the company can register, what is the name of my device, what is the type of the device. Now, this obviously isn't for Unity. This is like the device driver itself is telling it what it is or what
it's what it shows up as in Windows or whatever the operating system.
And a lot of them don't actually provide their real names and things. And my suspicion as to why is because some of these do work on Switch or on Xbox or whatever. And if they use their real IDs, then they wouldn't allow them to use third-party controllers in some cases. So a lot of them will read as I am a Switch Pro controller or I am a whatever. And so I wanted to see how much information do I have and how much information do I want to use effectively. And so long story short, I went through it all and realized that broadly there are 3 categories. There is the PlayStation style controllers, which are your the dual axis ones. And then you've got the Xbox style controllers, and then you've got the Switch style controllers, and they all register themselves under that sort of broad 3 headers. And there's a certain keyword they'll use to say, I am this category of controller. And so I thought, if I'm going to do prompts, I want to do prompts by that category. It doesn't always match one-to-one. For example, the 8-bit Doe, despite having Xbox buttons, registers itself as a Switch Pro controller. So you wouldn't always get exact one-to-ones, but you'll at least get something that is moderately, whatever the device thinks it should be represented as. And so that's step 1, figure out the device. And so that's simple enough. That's basically, there's an on controller changed event that fires. You can subscribe, listen to the current. And what's nice is the list of controllers will sort to the top the controller that most recently was acted with. And so you can always just say number 1 in list of controllers is the one that's most recently pressed.
And so it just has like a type ID on it, or a type.
So there's literally type, and there's also because there's type as in which broad category of controller am I. Then there's actually the name of whatever it registered as. Now the name will be sometimes more closely whatever the name of the device is, but the type will tell you I am a again, like it'll say Xbox controller or Xbox whatever. And so it's not always one-to-one in terms of names. It might be Xbox Pro controller or Xbox whatever. And so you often have to look for keywords like Microsoft or Xbox, or for PlayStation, Sony Pro, whatever, kind of depending on which way you're doing it. But once you detect roughly the category, and I basically made an enum for the big 2 or 3 that I'm detecting, and I kind of have a bunch of keywords I look for, as well as the set names I know certain controllers do register as, and then I have a rough category of which ones. And so that was the first problem. Make sure I know what they actually have, because it's very hard, surprisingly, to tell what the actual controller is, because they won't, again, like I said, it won't tell you the real name. And that's 1. Then 2 is like, what prompts do I show, or how do I get them? And so easiest prompts is I'm using the Awesome Guys prompt kit. So there's like a free prompt kit. Everybody knows these ones. It's like a preset one of just, they've gone and made a nice handy set of button icons for basically every controller ever. It's called Awesome Guys prompts. He has a YouTube channel as well. You've probably seen some of his stuff before. And that's my default starting test kit for those. And what I did is I took those prompts and I made sprite atlases. So a sprite atlas for each controller type. Sprite atlas for PlayStation, sprite atlas for each. And originally I did all of them because they actually have everything. They have everything right down to the Ouya. Yeah, exactly. So they have right down to like VR controllers, Ouya controllers. But realistically, I just said, I'm just going to take the latest from each. The PS5 controller, the latest Xbox. But they have each of them if you want to go down more granular from that point. So yeah, here we go. So actually that list you had there, Jason, on the device. Those list of properties. So the device class is, so that'll be again gamepad or keyboard. But then with each of these, what they'll do in some of them is the capabilities string, for example, that was only filled in by a couple of the controllers, but it gives you this nice like full array of all of the hats and values. So if you wanted to just try to guess and map to it, never really used that. But the other ones that were more useful were the specifics on like what is the product reported as exactly. Manufacturer, funnily enough, was blank in a lot of cases. So even in the Pro ones, literally the only company that had it set up was Sony. Everyone else actually had a blank manufacturer for some particular reason. But so you grab this value, you do a lookup, and then you now have another interesting problem, which is what do I display? So if I have jump as my button, and I'm saying if jump to whatever, how do I know what to find in the sprite atlas? So I've got a sprite atlas that now contains all of PlayStation, and the keyword is triangle, and I can return this triangle sprite. And I have an Xbox One, and I can pass in, X and get the X button. How do I map one to the other? Well, on each action map that you define in the input system, there is an option to say, get the display. And there's like a display name for that particular prompt. And thankfully, they've already set it up in Unity where they have what's called a generic controller, and all the others are bound as subcontrollers to it. So if you say, gamepad south, it'll give you the north, south, east, west on the buttons. You can detect it'll work for all controllers in that kind of each of the categories. Then when you ask for the prompt, it'll give you the exact one. So that's helpful in one case, but not helpful in another, because if you press it, it'll tell you triangle, or it'll tell you whatever, Y. And you think that would be great for binding one-to-one. But if you're trying to build a generic system that supports whatever you want, you now have a giant atlas, which has every single possible controller for everything. That's going to be a huge waste of memory, because you're having a whole lot of sprites that you won't use if they don't use the other kind of controller. So you actually want to map it to the appropriate type, right? So what I did is I have my sprite atlas per controller, and then I have so they're kind of like defined by each thing, but then I put it into a scriptable object. And so on change, I have a scriptable object for each, and I swap to the appropriate scriptable object for the current matching controller. But the problem I have now is I don't want to have like really hard-coded bindings for some of these, because some of them are not very clearly one-to-one. So you've got like your R1s and your R2s, and sometimes there's extra buttons on certain controllers, or
Mhm.
things that are hard to map to. And then separate from that, you now have the issue that the sprites have names in the sprite atlas. And so you have to decide, what do I call it versus the button? So say, for example, say it comes back as Y or X, or X. Say it comes back as X. Is it X for Xbox or X for PlayStation, right? And so now you have to figure out, is it PSX or underscore X, or is it like, Xbox X? And so you end up getting this kind of weird esoterica with this stuff. And I realized that the
Well,
problem is,
couldn't it just be X and they're just the same on both sprite sheets?
well, because they're not in the same positions in some cases, right? It's not always like X for the different one. And yet, I know what you're saying for like the initial sprite binding one-to-one, but the kind of hard to describe where the problem comes up. If you're trying to build something that's generic, where you have, let's see if I can describe this, but I basically, the problem is more so the fact that like the actual names of your sprites will have to match whatever the input thing is.
Mhm.
And so you end up with, it's like, I know I did do that. I know the TLDR, the original of what you were saying is I did have them all just be, let's rename them all to just one-to-one. So these are all X to X, Y to Y, whatever. But the problem I was having is I had to go through and check what each of the things came back as, and I ended up having issues where it wasn't always mapping one-to-one. And it's not a big deal. Like, you're right that it can be solved, but I realized that I don't want to have to solve this problem every time for different controllers. And so a very simple solution I made, which sort of fixes that for me, especially because of the other part too, is what if I want different sprite sets? Do I want to have to how am I going to define, say I have ones which are silly example, but say I had Christmas sprites and Halloween sprites, and I wanted to basically say change the icon slightly for certain ones. I didn't want to have to come up with like names or prefixes and stuff, because it ends up being a lot of extra garbage. So anyway, long story short, the simple.
I can't picture you ever going to do that though.
True, but I'm very much I like to solve things once,
button, so yeah.
Well,
No,
so
go ahead. I was just kind of curious though on the it seems interesting, but beyond like the three primary ones, is there really any use in worrying about or supporting all the generic off-brand ones, or is it more just like kind of fun to figure it out? Because I can't imagine
honestly,
any reasonable number of user base.
True, yeah, it was mostly just for fun, the main things, but it's also, I haven't done the statistics on it, but I have looked at, you'd be surprised how many people are using third-party controllers. And so it's less about supporting every controller ever. It's just showing that prompts will vaguely match what people have. And because a lot of them didn't map, the real reason I did this, if you want the exact thing, is originally I had it hard-coded for the actual controllers, as in, this is the prompt set for the PS5 specific new gamepad. And I noticed it then wouldn't show me anything at all, like not even any controller I could, because I didn't map the names correctly for certain ones, because I was checking for PS5. And so the original goal here was to say, what is the common denominator? Like, can I find Xbox-ish controller? That way, every Xbox controller, even if it only shows PS5 or Xbox, the new one, all Xbox ones will be Xbox ones, all PlayStation ones will be PlayStation ones. So that was the original intention. And then the other part is I wanted to be able to just even swap out the prompts for design purposes. So not about, like, the other stuff is nice, but the main reason is swapping them out for like later, say you start out with these prompts that I would use, but I would probably get them made for my game custom if I was doing it. If it's a pixel game, you're going to want pixel looking ones. You don't want to have a disconnected style for certain things. And also later on, there's a question with Steam, which gets even more complicated, because Steam have some rules around which sprite things you can do because of their input mapping, that actually they have rules about what they'll allow. So there's a different thing for that separately. So TLDR with that is I've set it up with this basic idea of the mapping, and it turns out to be pretty simple when I was done. The simple solution was I had the sprite atlas per thing, then I made a scriptable object with each one, and then I just had a text file, a simple JSON file, which is a key value pair that just said, this is the name coming in, this is the name of the sprite in the sprite map. And that way I could have them mapped that way. And then I just set it up to be relatively generic, that I could have, north button could always map the north, or it could map the triangle. So that works for both. And then I just swap it out appropriately as needed. And then the last step I added, because I wanted to show the prompts in a comfortable way, because you just want to cache them. Because if you don't know, when you grab an item from a sprite atlas, it's newing up a sprite. So you're making a sprite to do that. It's like, that's a performance cost of creating an object. So you don't just want to say sprite atlas get me sprite every time, because you're just creating a brand new one for every single time. And if you're going to be showing a button prompt multiple times throughout your game, every single time a dialog pops up and shows it, you're making a new one. So you want some kind of a cache for that. So I built a little caching layer that would say, when you switch controller, either wipe the cache, and then as you call get sprite, create a new sprite, put it in the cache, and then every subsequent person that says get me the sprite from my button will get one from that cache collection. And then as a last step, because I use a global input manager across the whole project, it makes it easier that way. I registered a system where when you can register something as a prompt. Prompt basically says input system.register prompt receiver or something, and it can register and unregister, and that receiver will receive, when a device changes, a sprite that it should use to draw, the name of the object and the name of the controller if it needs to change anything, and then it'll also be able to subscribe to events for unpressed, unreleased, and the value for the press and hold. That way, if it wants to do a little animation for pressing, it can. And so the end result after all of this is it's not that hard to set up. You just drop in these 3 scriptable objects which have the sprite atlases set up, and then the actual use case is, say, some UI element. I built the default one called like TextMesh Pro Sprite Renderer, and it's a single thing that would like, grab the reference on receive event, draw thing, and whatever. And in the case of TextMesh Pro, which is slightly different, I don't use the sprite provided to me because it's provided by my cached system. TextMesh Pro has its own atlas for emojis. It does its own separate thing. And so I have a separate set of atlases that have to be set up for that, for its own emoji thing. And then I just use the keyword. So I don't use the actual sprite. I pass in the keyword in a square brackets, and it will cache and render the sprite inline. Now you can pass in the sprite, but this was a simpler solution. So after all of that, just for input thing, I now have a thing which will show the correct prompt and will nicely switch whenever the controller does. And then for one added little bit of spice, I threw in Prime Tween, which is my Tweeny library of choice, and it does a nice little blended crossfade. So now I could pick up a controller, press a button, and it just like fades the icon nicely to the new one between controller or gamepad or whatever. And then if I press the trigger down or I press the button, it does a nice little like depress icon animation. And then if I press it and it do a little shake or something, each one can then change color or do something. And so now, regardless of the project or what I'm doing, regardless of the controller, I can just say draw thing or show thing. And then the bindings are all handled by the native input system thing. And so it turned out to be about 10 files, a little thing, but works for what I need. And even though, as you said, it's probably not a really big use case, the reason I like having this other system I have, which allows me to choose a theme or something that can like swap out the entire sprite set, is I'm a big fan of Yoko Taro and the idea of playing with the game engine as a medium. And so having, say, for example, some part of the game from a meta perspective breaks and the icon literally changes to a broken button that indicates you can't press it or something. To me, these sorts of things are a very interesting part of game design where you can play with
update, swapping them out live during the game. That makes way more sense. I was trying to figure out how you couldn't just swap out the texture. I was like, oh, just change it. I get it. Now that makes 1,000 times more sense. Okay.
Yeah, and so like, it's not like it's more again, the original implication was purely I was just because without, again, a small tangent on a tangent, I design mockups in Figma. So when I want to see what something will look like, rather than try to design it in Unity, which is a real pain, I open Figma, I design a page screen, and I show it. In fact, one of the images I sent you earlier is a Figma UI design. You can probably show that, the paste bin, I think. No, not the paste bin. Maybe I haven't sent the image, but I have this UI example that I use. Let me see if I pulled it up. But basically, I do mock-ups for designs for UI. And then I was using the Xbox controller mock-up as my prompt example. And I was like, I want to make sure it looks good across the board. So the original was just, I wanted to support these for each of the different scenarios,
Dustin had a question too on this input stuff. I have one on performance, but Dustin was wondering about the Steam Deck. Did you set it up for those? I know you have multiple of those similar devices. Did you already try the controls on there? Does it work the same?
I haven't deployed to it, but I have built the prompts for the Steam Deck. Because again, I didn't make these. These are all done by the prompt guys ones. So I have prompts for those, both the Steam controller and the Steam Deck. And they are set up with sort of the key binding for it. But I had a talk with somebody at my mastermind meetup last week, and they told me they hit particular issues dealing with Steam validation on the last game they worked on, where because they have their input wrapper, which does this whole like allows you to rebind in the Steam overlay, they have certain rules about prompts and how it registers and stuff. And so I now have new homework to look into to make sure that I support, because apparently what happens is their Steam wrapper will re-identify and modify the bindings of IDs of certain controllers and things. At least, again, this is what I hear. I haven't tried it myself, but I understand it's a whole new thing where they actually take over a lot of it, and they sort of give you a mock controller instead that handles based on whatever the bindings are done in the Steam thing. So I now have to make sure that specifically the Steam, it's supported slightly differently. So
interesting.
a lot to focus on and think about.
Yeah, I haven't pulled my Steam Deck out in a while, but I'd kind of be interested in playing with it since I've switched over to using new input for everything as well, and see kind of what that experience is like. Andrew, I'm curious, are you like supporting controllers in your own game development? Is that something you've dug into?
Not yet.
Mouse and keyboard.
I've recently been just playing around with a Mario Kart type thing, and that's been on my mind because it's really not Mario Kart thing is really a demo of another thing, but using that as to build this other thing. And yeah, currently as I'm using keyboards just left and right, AWSD, which of course for a kart game is not the most fun. You're either moving left or right or straight, and so I haven't done it yet. I think I remember doing input a long time ago and not enjoying it at all. So I think there's a part of me that is traumatized and doesn't want to go back yet.
That's probably why I did it, because multiple times I've gone back and just something annoying happened. I was like, I just need to take the time once. I just need to really sit down and just figure this out so that I don't have these issues again. Because it used to just drive me insane where I would try to register the device name and it would come back slightly differently for things than I expected. And it would be like, because you have to string match it, right? You have to go, is it Xbox space controller or is it Microsoft space Xbox space controller? It's like, this is so infuriating. I just need to know how this works once just to solve it. And it's, now I do. Now I can solve it.
If memory serves, I used In Control, the asset In Control back in the day. But this is like 9 years ago. I'm sure it's still fine. It's still on the asset store.
Well, it's the one used by Hollow Knight, right? That's the asset they use for input, right? So
and then Rewired, you mentioned Rewired. That's the go-to as well. So those are the two I would use if I had to,
Yeah, if you want to have a button that solves it for you, Rewired is the button. Now, granted, you'd have to learn how to use the button because it's not super easy initially, but it does very much do everything I've said and infinitely more. Especially if you're doing games with like driving or racing games, you want to support even specific wheels that have different settings, like the options to handle vibration in the Logitech G controllers differently because of the support it has for certain features. You can do all of that with Rewired, which is much harder. You can do all of that in Unity, but you have to define your own device types, and there's also a way of defining your own bindings. It's not worth all of the hassle. So the truth is, if I was doing something where an input per device was unique for whatever reason, I would 1000% use Rewired. But if you're doing your classic, I want to support all of the common game controllers for consoles and things, you can do that all with Unity's one.
Yeah, I feel like if I was doing a console game again, I'd be probably just use Rewired.
Yeah.
Just out of the box, it'd be like my default. Just go to that. It's already got most of those problems solved and don't have to deal with them. You just shared a
I just posted a quick image just to show what I was talking about when I say that the way I try to do things is I start in Figma. I do a mock-up of a UI design like this, where I say what would I design a level like UI thing like. Put the prompts in the appropriate places, and then I figure out how I'd like the UIs to look. And I was kind of thinking what animations I would like for it and how they would slide or whatever. And so for that, I was like, okay, I want these icons to change. How am I going to handle it? I would have to change both the label and the keyword. Would that be a text mesh or would it be an actual sprite? How would I handle it? And so when I do the mock-up, I would then sit and look at how to solve the input problem for that particular thing. And so this is sort of what I settled on for input. So that's my general workflow. Is I like to start with the mock-up first of the UI, so I know what I'm reaching for, and then I will block it out, and I will make the sprites in Figma, modify them sometimes in Affinity if I want to add interesting effects and blurs and things, and then pop it over to Unity afterwards.
When we were talking earlier, you mentioned another tool. I was about to ask the question: can you just export from Figma to Unity? Is that even a thing?
So Figma is designed to be so broad, it works with literally everything. And so the way Figma works is you don't export Figma files. Figma can say literally, because it's a tree structure, right? So you've got like, here's a page, the page has components have images, whatever. You can pick any element that you want and hit the little export button, and you don't actually export. What you do is you mark it for export. You're saying, I want to both export the full page, but also the little tile, but also the icon separately, or maybe all of it together or not, or whatever. So you basically, in part of designing in Figma, you actually mark what parts are exportable, and you also choose the formats. So I recently redesigned my logo for my Discord, which you'll see is a new logo I redesigned. And obviously I wanted that to be in SVG, because it's much better for scaling. So I want to design it and export it both as a large PNG for common use cases and an SVG for standard use cases. So you can actually mark multiple exports. So the same image in my Figma file exports twice when I press export. It exports both as the SVG and also as the 4x sized PNG. So the short answer is yes, you can export all of the parts you like, and then once you've got the parts, you can do whatever you like with them. If you're trying to be super performant, the answer, of course, is probably to take that into something and modify it, maybe even make a sprite sheet out of it. But to be honest, Unity Sprite Atlas is really good. You can just drop a bunch of images into a folder. Don't create the compression. Turn off the compression on the individual sprites. Then mark the sprites not as multiple, because they defaulted to multiple for some reason now, which is really
it's horrible. It's ever since the 2 version. I don't know. I have no idea why everything defaults to multiple, and then to go explain it every single time. It's
especially when they have such a good sprite atlasing system, and then they go and set it as default, presuming you've built your own sprite atlas. Like, why? Like, if you have the system built in with the compression dynamically available, anyway.
Oh, and the sprite package isn't even there to do multiple.
No, you have to add it. Yeah, you have to actually.
It's such a multiple, and the package to support multiple is not even in.
It's infuriating. But yes, so you take all your sprites from Figma, drop them into a folder, and then you can set the type and compress it, and then from that point on, you don't reference sprites, you reference Sprite Atlas. One caveat to that, though, is if I'm designing something that is more like a HUD, I don't do it that way, because it's a real pain to modify all the individual sprites. For that, I actually take all the sprites from Figma, I put them into either Photoshop or I use Affinity Photo myself, but they can both export in PSD, Photoshop's format, and you export a PSD file. So you basically make a canvas that's the correct resolution for the actual screen with all of the sprites in the right places as they would be. And then you can import the single PSB file into the project. And that adds 2 benefits. One, when you drop a sprite on and hit the button that says aspect ratio, it will automatically size it exactly to the size you want without having to do any weird scaling stuff, because it'll be the correct size for the canvas. And the second thing is it's a dynamically bound file. So if you go in and want to tweak colors, you can even do it live. As you're looking at stuff, you can modify the PSB file. It'll re-import and refresh the sprites and things, which is way simpler than having to like open the folder and swap the file or do other weird stuff with it.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to try that.
I admit I stole that one from Thomas Brush. In his course on game dev, he was designing a bunch of stuff, and his workflow was just infinitely more efficient for sprite work than I was doing. And I was like, rather than me opening folders and copying files, I was at the stage I was thinking about writing automation scripts to move files for me, and it's like, this is silly. There's got to be a better way. And then seeing that now, obviously there's flaws with having a giant 4K canvas PSB file that represents all of your stuff if you're only putting like 7 sprites on it. So you have to be careful when and where that makes sense. But at least initially for prototyping, I find it's infinitely easier to design in Figma, remock up in Photoshop or something, drop that file in, and then you can play with all the design pieces like they're Lego to get what you want, and you don't have to worry too much about things like the sizes being wrong and stuff, because if you decide to resize it in one, you can just hit the automatic button that says aspect, correct scale for type, and it'll instantly be the correct places and sizes.
Now, I want to move on a little bit from UI, so we go too long, but there was a question here that popped up, and it's very relevant to something we were talking about before the show as well. I think we have to talk about it. Fists of Fury said, Magic Pig. I love it. I love that now people are going to call you Magic Pig. It's going to be great. And I think next year at GDC, I'm just going to call you Magic Pig.
That's fine.
Magic Pig.
I always debate whether I should just be called Pig, but then people might get confused. But
Magic Pig sounds much nicer. That's great. But are we not going to talk about how you officially set the new standard for asset marketing with the projectile system video? I watched it solid 5 times for the chuckles, and it is good. But we were literally talking about this earlier about Storey saying how he put out an asset many years ago and just kind of did no marketing and would yell at himself about the job that he did of marketing it before. So
I tried once ever to make an asset, and Unity came back and said, "That's terrible. Go away." And I said, "That's fair." And I didn't try again. This was like 11 years ago. So. Oh yeah, 14. Yeah, it's crazy. Something like it's crazy. So you're right. I now look at Mr. Pig's games here as the assets as a good mark of how to do it right. So.
Well, I had some good prodding from folks like you on marketing, but It's funny. Maybe a few weeks ago, there was another asset. I forget which one now, that came up on the asset store that had a theme song. And I thought, wow, I think on Reddit, somebody said, this is the first ever that has a theme song. I'm like, it's not the first. I don't even know if Projectile Factory is the first, but it came out about a year ago, I think. And at the time, it could have been the first. I'm not sure. But yeah, that theme song, it still gets stuck in my head. It worked. It worked, and I'm very proud of it.
I remember you working on this too. It was kind of fun watching you kind of come up with new cool abilities and things for it.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Like and this we were talking about earlier. I really liked the system, and Projectile system Factory is a behavior based system. You just have small behavior. So you have a projectile. How does it act? You just throw in behavior scripts to control how it moves, how it interacts, how it speeds, whatever you want to do. You can just write bite-sized behaviors and throw that on. And I really like that idea. I like the things like behavior trees too, though that always intrigues me, but also that seems like a very big thing. And so the thing I was working on recently was a behavior system that's more just simple, where I'm like, because I was thinking first, my thought process was first, Mario Kart World was announced, and I was like, that's fun. I want to play with Mario Kart. I want to make a kart asset. And then I was like, how am I going to control this? Well, behaviors. I like the way I did behaviors with Projectile Factory. This seems very simple as well. States, you got, are you in the air? Are you not in the air? Are you underwater? Are you on hover mode? And then just everything can respond based on the state of the object, and then the behaviors slapped on for those states. And it's very easy then to switch them out to test something without changing your code. Lots of fun stuff there. And so, the short version, I started using behaviors again, and that's my
I have a question for you, Andrew. If you ever looked at the behavior system, I know you've heard Uri talk about its virtues a while back, and before the memes of it's dead or whatever, it's a perfectly fine self-contained asset. Like, it doesn't really. Yes, there's a few bugs and stuff, and they're probably going to, even though they're not continuing it as an ongoing thing, it's a perfectly standalone works. So, like, I literally, you can use it for what it's needed for. I guess my question is, have you looked at using that at all yourself?
I did. I looked at it give or take a year ago, maybe. And I loved the way you could just write words and then turn some of those words into variables. That was very intriguing to me. It ended up being something I decided I didn't want to do for my own RPG project, but I played with it for a few days, basically getting it working with some NPCs, some bad guys. And I decided I just didn't want to go down that, because that, to me, that was something where if you're going to use it, you're going to use it. And
well, that's what I was kind of alluding to, is that I think on it, like, legitimately, it would take you less than a day. You could do one of your classic multi-hour streams just to kind of get it done. You could take your existing assets, something like this one. You could build a set of nodes, because it is literally just make my own custom node, choose. It's like expose two fields, hook it to an existing system I already have. You don't even have to do anything weird. You just reference your existing system, hook up to 2 or 3 exposed variables, hook into the loop system, write that string where it says, if this, do this thing. Then you would basically be able to make a plugin for your asset in less than a couple of hours that would allow someone to entirely visually compose the bullets and things using just the visual nodes with a nice written descriptor. I guarantee you'd have no problem doing that in less than one stream for one of your assets. And you'd be able to make a really visual, fun way of composing, whether it's your stat system or whether it's your projectile system. I think you genuinely enjoy that, and it would be a really good value add for your assets.
That would be interesting. Kind of tying it all in, especially if you can do it in one stream and have Storey there answering the questions whenever anything breaks.
Yeah. And again, I'm certain, like, it's to be fair to Unity on the design of this, it's really straightforward. It's, you just extend one object, you add a few variables. You do have to vaguely understand the basics of how a graph works. But if you, like, again, once you understand the idea of entering and exiting, doing a tick update loop, it's like, because you've already built all of the effort into modularizing your stuff, that it would be very straightforward for you to basically just make a thing that hands off, that takes on a statement or a request and just passes it to your existing system. There might be a little bit of teething in terms of how it's structured, but I guarantee it would be pretty straightforward to combine it. And I know from my own stuff that, well, I don't tend to use visual graphs. I will often build a layer in my preferred one, which is Node Canvas, for clients whenever I work on stuff, if they have Node Canvas in the project. And so now it's like, it adds a nice way for you to hand off to a designer and say, if you're into the editor code stuff, you can do it this way. But if you want to, I can give you a demo scene of a bunch of nodes hooked together, and it's much easier for non sort of technical people to go in and like modify those things or swap values in a very written way.
I'll have to look into it. I think the graph stuff always is intriguing to me, and I've done a few forays into it, but I've always gotten stuck mostly, and I don't know, maybe you all know where the state of the built-in graph system is with Unity. In the past, it was like preview mode, and then it's canceled, then it's back, then I don't know where it is now. And now yeah,
they are building new system. It should, from what they said, it will be launching soon. So this is the new one that's responsible for the shader graph 2.0 and the new animation system. So they're building one system that should be available to us to program ourselves and should be working with all the new tools they are developing.
Okay.
I'm looking forward to it because I do genuinely enjoy using those kinds of graph tools. It's just like you're saying, I want it to be something that I could add to my workflow and not feel like I have to worry about rewriting or hacking stuff in. And the only reason I'd even recommend it to you for this, Andrew, is just because it's one of those things that you can sidecar. You can make a folder called behavior integration that contains 20 files. Each one is just a spawn particle, choose particle type, modify part or something, and you could very easily make something that would just be a really nice sidecar that wouldn't affect your other stuff. And if something goes wrong with it or they break it later, you just don't include that folder or don't delete it. And suddenly, like, it doesn't cause you to have to rework anything you do. It's just a nice value add on the top. So if you ever decide to do that and do one of your streams, feel free to give me a shout and we can pair program some of that stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll look into it. The new behavior thing, the angle for that was I wanted something that was just super simple. And so I thought about graphs again, because I always do. And then I thought, no, this needs to just be a inspector thing. You've got your object. It will have states. You'll define those states, and then you'll put on simple behaviors that literally just do one thing, at a time. And then other things. This is the other thing now, expanding it, right? We got Mario Kart. You got the wheels. The wheels have to turn. The wheels have to move when they're in hover mode or do whatever they do. And so just these things would have to have a mechanism of saying, okay, connect to the object. And again, do one thing based on the state, one thing based on the state of the main object. But
before we look at this graph, I don't want to pull up the graph toolkit stuff. I did want to talk just a little bit about your marketing here too, because it was the original question. Yeah. And now that the video is actually working on your system, you can kind of see what they're talking about and why it works so well. And I think that this is true for anybody who wants to sell assets or games. Obviously, the same rule applies to when you're marketing and selling your game, doing something similar. Anybody want to talk about what's special about this trailer versus others? Andrew, I assume you don't want to talk for all yourself about
it. I'm happy to talk. It starts with I wanted an exciting video that showcased it, and AI exists now, and so I spent a large amount of time making music until I found something that stuck in my head, and then I made a video where I essentially wanted to showcase this is what it can do. This is the inspector. This is how easy it is to just switch things. This is, like literally this part is like this one fires 3, this one fires 10, this one fires all around, just to show like, no, just this is just a behavior. Just change that to this, and now it's acting completely different.
And spinning around and shooting in all directions.
Yeah, and the asset does not come with these particles. These are from third-party particle systems because they're really cool. And some users have, don't like that because they get those and they're like, it doesn't work. I'm like, of course you need to buy the other things, but it does really cool things and works with all these different things. And that's why I want to showcase. And hopefully it worked out well, because ultimately people do keep commenting that they watch it multiple times because of the music. Did Wyman get
No,
kicked off?
Greg's joining us now. I just killed
Greg.
myself on the video.
Wyman was so blown away that he just had to take a breath. He just had to
It's
step
not
away.
equipment. Yeah, I had to go integrate it into all my projects. I did put a link in chat though, if anybody hasn't checked out Projectile Factory and wants to grab it. Is that included in the upcoming sales, or should they just grab it now?
Don't think so. You should grab it now. And if you
Okay.
grab it now, it's more likely to be included in upcoming sales, I bet. Since you need to be popular to be in the sales.
All right, there are a bunch of popular things in the sales, though,
Yeah.
right? Did you have anything, any characters in there?
I think the low poly bundles are in the sale, if I'm not mistaken.
I've got a link down in the description so everybody can go check it out. And I know Powell had the World Streamer in there. I didn't see if there was anything else yet, though.
There will be World Steamer. In the Flash deals, World Steamer and Lava and Volcano 2023.
Yeah.
Nice. So we'll do. I think we'll talk about it a lot next up when they all go live and go over some of the top things in there. That'll be fun.
Yeah.
Anyway, Greg, welcome. Have you checked out the Projectile Factory video as well?
Yeah. Is it new? I mean, I just joined late, but I already have it. The original.
No, it's not new. It's just so cool that it's timeless. That's what it is.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's the bomb.
See what you did there.
All right, so let's we were going to talk a little bit about the new graph system too. I think I want to pop that up and share it. And Powell, you want to just tell everybody, you were wrong screen. You were mentioning that this is a new system that's supposed to be coming sometime in the future and be able to use it.
Can you move to the top? That's, I think, the first post was, it was announced during GDC that it's coming soon. First, they talked about it during Unite last year, that they're working on new graph toolkit. At the beginning, they said it will be only in the next version of Unity, so not 6, but from what they told in GDC, it's coming soon. What's next is available soon. So I had to say it will be behind the new Unity animation tool and for the new shader graph 2.0, from what I know. It looks good, yeah. From programming side, it also will be, we will be able to use it in our editor. So hope we will finally have a good tool that we can use it for all of the things we want.
Yeah, it looks really nice. Have you looked at the coding API for it?
It's not yet available. It's still
Okay.
not available, so you still cannot check it. That's you can check the discussion. That's a few things the developers of it are saying about it, but we still don't have it to check the code. I'm waiting because I also wanted always to do some graphical things for our assets, but it was changing so much each tool, or doing it myself is always problematic with Unity changing everything.
Yeah, this definitely looks interesting, but I've seen so many graph tools, and almost always they have a really terrible programming API that makes them nearly impossible to extend and work with. So I'm hopeful that this is solving those issues. Right? This is like their 5th attempt or something at one of these. So hopefully it's got all the problems all solved this time.
If it is stable and it works, I can see so much opportunity with this when it comes to making assets that make use of it, because building a graph tool is the hardest thing of building any visual node-based tool, in my opinion. So having something standardized would be huge.
Also, on a personal level, it hurts me how much people struggle with state machines as a concept. They have a lot of issues with managing state and stuff. And as you were describing earlier, they're kind of insanely powerful. They're the kind of thing where for people in the know, the big 3 patterns being command, strategy, and state are ones which are almost ironically the simplest from an amount of code perspective, but the most transformative in terms of how much value you get out of them. And the state one is one that, like, I see so many people tie themselves in knots, because there's lots of ways to get states confusing or wrong, where you end up having to inherit the legacy issues of going, oh God, my states don't support this. How do I hack it in later? And then you have to end up retrospectively adding to a bunch of stuff, and it gets real messy. And so having something where the actual state is a self-contained thing, because basically a lot of these things at the end of the day are state machines where the nodes handle for you the ins, the outs, and the processing step. And all you do is choose when input comes in, do these things, then send it out to this node. It means people can forgo having to understand how to write their own sequencers and how to do, combiners and all the other parts that would attach onto it from a graph perspective. And they can just focus on, like, if I have a thing and it takes in a color, it changes the color by 20% luminance. If they can build their own little bits like that, then they can focus on their problems, and the kind of compounding effect of all of those is really cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. I also wonder, that UI in that graph is not my personal favorite. I wonder if it's going to be extensible where people can create new sort of UI
you'd
views.
think, right? Because the whole thing is, like, if they're using the new system, the new UI, which means they're using style sheets, it means theoretically it should be easy to do pretty much anything by modifying a style sheet to have different colors, moving objects around, that kind of thing. So it'd be cool to have somebody even produce an asset that's just like style sheets for the graph, that you could add different styles to your things,
Yeah. And different, I guess you could create entirely new types of nodes in a way that have complete new functionality in them based on that too.
Yeah. I'd imagine, again, depending on the style sheeting stuff, you could probably use classes to indicate that these are nodes that are, input only nodes, or nodes that are a certain kind of style that do certain actions. Like maybe there's a node which is destructive and ones which are additive, and you could have, like, the destructive ones have a little flame effect on them. So you can do whatever you like. It's sort of crazy thing.
Yeah. I mean, that obviously, when you get to these graphs, keeping it simple is important, but they can get very complex, right? And then once you get to a certain point, especially if you leave for a month and come back, you're like, oh, what was I doing? So having visual representations of concepts like this is destructive, or this is that, or whatever it might be, can be extremely useful just to keep yourself organized.
Well, honestly, that's vital, because for people in the whole AI stuff you're talking about earlier, still the number one best utility for AI anything is called Comfy UI, and it is a glorified node editor that doesn't do anything other than nodes. It's a graph system for AI, and everything about it is plugins. Everything is attaches to certain provider on one end, certain AI thing or certain image thing, and they're not all AI. Some of them are just like, this is an image editor that will modify images, or this lets you paint masks onto images. They're all various nodes, and to do really complex stuff, you need really complex node trees. And to your point, you come back later and go, here's the thing which generates a certain kind of image with the exact layout and structure and size, and uses this and matches motion to this and does it. It's like could be 60 nodes, and you're like, what was I doing again? And so a lot of the work comes down to managing it from a visual perspective. And a bunch of the plugins, the ones that I would use especially, are actually for modifying the graph itself, for things like making compound nodes, which lets you select 7 nodes and make a new super node, which is kind of dynamically built, and you expose only the features of that node that you want, and it becomes this like really nice, this is a problem. Or again, subgraphs do the same kind of principle. So things like that become really important. And then even just the ability to, like you said, for color coding, because what happens later on gets really messy, is chaining. So I've got something like a texture here where I'm using the texture in 7 places. Do I want a graph system that requires me to put like 7 lines across the whole thing and muddy it? Or can you do something like a portal, where a portal is like a single node you draw a line to, and it says export with a keyword, like say it's an ID of like texture 1 or a name. You could somewhere else, you can just have a word texture 1 everywhere, and it just knows to bind all of those. So graphing is more than just tying lines together. There's a level of sort of, how do I modularize and structure it in a way that's efficient? And that's before you get to things like modular graphs, because you might have a graph which has like 3 routes. Imagine how handy it would be if you could have a graph that simultaneously has your export for SRP, URP, or whatever. Now, again, ideally you wouldn't need that in future, but if you had something like that, you could have a toggle switch which would actively toggle entire branch tree nodes relative to which thing you're in, and you don't have to make 3 separate things and separate out. You can just have a single switch that will entirely disable routes on a graph. So depending on how complex it gets, graph systems can be very in-depth in terms of how they work.
Yeah. I know Amplify Shade Editor does a few of those things. that you mentioned, and they're very convenient when you're working with textures, for example.
Even the aliasing, even the fact that you can have a different name for things like the exported value properties and shader stuff versus or whatever to the ones that are used in the fields, and the range slider. Honestly, it's a silly thing, but my favorite feature is the fact that you can define value min maxes on the actual types themselves, because I was making a custom shader for a character recently, and I wanted to do like skins that change, but I wanted to crossfade them. And so the easiest way to do that was two textures that would crossfade, and I had a nice flash effect in between, and being able to define very specifically the 0 to 1 values, or doing like certain kind of curves to slide one into the other, to be able to define this value is very specifically these numbers, or a float that's a rotation, and to be able to say this is expressly between 0 to 360, that you have to pick those values. I think that's a small feature, but it lets you avoid weird scenarios. Because if you look at the really early shaders that used to come out with assets, you'd get something and go, oh, put a number in here. What number? I don't know. Like, I don't know if the asset wants me to put in 0.05 or they want me to put in 5,000. I have no concept of what the actual range of values is for this value, you know?
All right, before we run out of time, I got two other topics that I wanted to bring up. First, I'm really curious, Greg, what it is you've been up to and how the game development's been going. And then, Storey, I got to ask you about last week's episode. Well, about the topic of last week's episode, vibe coding. So first, Greg, any big updates? I know you're doing some games, some learning stuff, and other things.
Yeah, well, a ton. There's just not enough time, right? But before I say that, I listen to Jason talk. I want to have like a lunch and learn where he demonstrates all these things he's talking about and gives us these real world examples, because it's some pretty cool stuff. But for me, I did that Genie's Game Jam. That was fun. Writing a game in 2 weeks using TypeScript, which was definitely.
How was the experience going through the TypeScript side of it? I've done it myself, but I'm really curious to get an external opinion, somebody else's.
Yeah, my experience was a little frustrating. It just seemed their framework seemed kind of brittle, and I spent a whole lot of time just trying to get stuff to work that should have been simple. And I would make a seemingly trivial change that didn't even seem related to the problem it would cause. Like my character controller would just stop, my animator would stop animating on a character, and nothing that I changed should have affected the animation at all. But if I reverted my change and then re-implemented the same change, it worked fine. And I never understood why things were breaking. But overall, I mean, it was definitely fun. The constraints, they really focused you on the kind of development you could do. In hindsight, based on some of the feedback I got from Brandon, Sasquatch, because it was a vertical portrait mode game, instead of doing a side scroller like I did, where you couldn't see very far ahead, which kind of increased the difficulty, a top down version where you're running up probably would have been a little easier for the player.
Yeah, that would have made a lot more sense. That's funny. I was wondering when I was going through and judging them which one was yours, but I didn't want to ask.
Well, that's good. You don't want to be biased.
Yeah. I did like your concept, though. I like the whole time thing, because I think it's one of my favorite. It's for movies especially. It's one of my favorite like ideas or gimmicks. I love anything to do with time or the way time works, and so I thought that was a pretty cool take on things.
Yeah, and I wanted to put so much more in, to fit that concept, but I just ran out of time because, the learning curve with the SDK and everything. The other thing I've been working on, I have my math game on Legends of Learning, and it's actually doing pretty well. Even though I was at the bottom of the pack for the learning objective that my game is in, I got a decent chunk of revenue last quarter.
And they promoted you too, right? They were like, actually, this is how we want people to do it. You were an example, yeah.
Yeah, and so I was checking my play time for this quarter, and I'm leading the pack for my learning objective, and I've already got way more gameplays this quarter than I did all of last quarter. So next quarter revenue should be pretty decent. So out of all the games that I've released and everything, the one that's making me the most money is the Legends of Learning game. So I took their learning objectives spreadsheet, which has all of the topics, subjects and stuff. And it also has the games there's like 5 slots per learning objective, and you can see which learning objective has slots available, and you can also see what the earning potential is for each one. So I basically fed that spreadsheet into ChatGPT and had it give me the top 5 learning objectives with available slots, sorted by, earning potential from highest to lowest. And then I had Gemini generate game concepts, 5 game ideas for each of those learning objectives. And I'm going through them. I'm like running them, through my kids and grandkids to see which ones they think would be fun and trying to come up with some ideas for my next game.
That's cool.
Nice.
Nice.
I like it. It's like a nice repeatable process, and you're getting better and better each time, and just keep growing and building it up. That actually seems like a pretty interesting
it
business
becomes
model.
passive income, right? Because I don't have to promote the game or anything. I just submit it to their platform. If it gets approved, it gets in their catalog. Teachers assign it to students, and I get revenue. And I don't have to do anything else unless they find a bug that needs to be fixed.
Nice. Seems like a really good idea. Good kind of a setup. People should check it out. Also, the Genie's TypeScript thing, I think was one of the things that I think was really interesting and unique about it is how it did the live reloading of the game. It was basically like having hot reload, but in your live application. Which I thought was pretty interesting. Definitely makes it a lot more complicated and confusing, though, having to go to TypeScript. So, all right, now Storey, vibe coding. Is it going to replace all the coders? This will be our last topic for the day.
I was afraid that's what, yeah. So okay, so my meme answers, I say, when people have asked me, I said, I really love vibe coding because as long as the new generation make themselves bad at programming, I have more jobs. Because for those who don't know, I'm currently looking for work. So if anybody has any work, feel free to hit me up. But if I want to be completely actually honest about it, I have some friends who are vibe coders specifically. One of them is a friend of mine, Nadia. She's actually really... She can't code. That's like a thing she's never learned how to do. But she owns businesses, like literally full-on AI-based businesses where she's managing things and making products for bespoke, white-labeled things for people, for companies that do different tasks. Because if you don't know that space, because I didn't, like I was teaching her some stuff, but she was showing me all these tools I'd never heard of. And turns out that the space for like automating database stuff has gotten pretty crazy. So while the vibe coding portion, like people think you're making entire systems from scratch and like designing databases. The truth is you've got things out there like Supabase, which have handled all of the actual real world problems for database stuff. And the quote unquote vibe portion is the stitching code. It's like saying I'm using 3 APIs and you're using the vibe portion to interface between them. If you're not trying to rewrite the systems, they can be quite powerful. But that being said, the thing is, like all of these tools, they eventually hit a brick wall where you limit what you want to do relative to the feature set that's out there. And the thing that I've noticed is, I actually had a bit of a rant on this. So if people if you've ever seen these videos which are like why AI is bad or whatever, every so often you'll see an angry rant from me under one of the videos where I get annoyed at the topic because I think it's very nuanced. I think there's a lot of very naive responses. And one of them is that I would say is if you look at it as output, the output of a lot of AI is garbage. I don't think anyone really disagrees with that. But what people miss is it's the process that's important. And if you're new to programming, you've never programmed before, we've all been there with a new task. We're learning anything. It's so disheartening. If you try to do game dev and you say, let's start by making a game. And as we all know, the meme is everyone wants to make an MMO. And if you actually look into that, you'll learn within 1 week going, maybe I'm not a game dev. Maybe there's just too much here for me to do. This is exhausting. What vibe coding does is it's no different in my mind from a like use case perspective as someone using a level editor in a game. That's not making a game. You're not really making a game when you use like Portal 2's level editing system. But what you are doing is you're understanding the basics in a very safe sandbox to do so. And I think the truth is a lot of people learn that way. A lot of people start by building levels mods. Then they hit a brick wall where it's like, I want to do more than the system allows. And then they move on to mods for their favorite games. And then they work with that until they get frustrated and want to make something custom and they make their own games. Yori being a very prime example of someone who came out of the modding scene into full-time doing it professionally. And so if you don't look at it as vibe coding being someone trying to replace a job or trying to like mimic what the experts do and see it as a much more interactive and interesting way to like ease the onboarding of very complicated topics, yes, a lot of people will try to live there and fail, but a lot of other people will be inspired by the now easier barrier to entry and use the limitations as a jumping off point where their own frustration will guide them to the next fun thing. So for me personally, I don't like vibe coding as an idea. And the main reason why is because I look at it as it's as good as you believe that as you respect the industry. For example, if I wanted to make music, vibe musician, all good. I don't want to go to a vibe doctor, right? Like the point is, if you think programming is a craft, if it's a thing you take seriously, you want to have someone who takes it seriously do it. And unfortunately, programming as a rule is about solving problems. You can't really vibe your way to whether a solution is or isn't successful. Now, creative fields, you can vibe to it or whatever. So the point is, if it is creative or learning, either scenario, I'm all for it. I actually think it's more positive than negative. But if it's solving problems, I want someone who takes it seriously and respects it for what it is and understands that it's a problem solution thing and not something that you vibe with. So I'm not as if I drop the memeing, I'm not actually as negative to it as people think, but I do think that it's people who say they are quote unquote real programmers when they're vibe coding they're wrong. They're just factually wrong. But people who hate on them for thinking that they're, these are idiots who don't know what they're doing or they're not real programmers, they're wrong because it's the first step. The first step to learning anything is not knowing how to do it. And I just think it's a new generation of how people are onboarding in a way that is kind of more of a toy than previous generations. But I wish I had that when I was younger. I would have probably enjoyed learning more. Where
do you think it's gonna end up though? Because I mean, I still feel like this is a lot like when I started programming and some people were using like BASIC, and that was considered not programming because you weren't in assembly or you weren't in C. And then it was JavaScript was not considered programming because it wasn't a real language. And I don't get me wrong. I know the vibe coding stuff right now is at the point where it's not really totally reliable in generating things. But do you think that mid to long term, 5 to 10 years, that AI, not so much vibe coding, but just AI will be able to generate most simple applications or most medium-sized applications, and they'll work well enough that there's no benefit in having somebody go in and hand code those, and that it'll only be big things? Or do you think that that's never going to be the case, or AI will take over all of them? I really feel like it's probably going to get there. I had this discussion with my 16-year-old recently, and I really feel like it's not going to be that much longer before AI is writing relatively good code that's good enough for 50+% of tasks and projects. I mean, given that 2-3 years ago, the idea of AI writing code was laughable and like it just kind of kicked up. I feel like give it a little bit more time and it's just going to explode. But
okay, so
it's still obviously exploding. We're kind of watching the explosion happen.
You're obviously hitting a lot of nuanced topics, and like depending on how we could literally talk about this for hours. But let me just give a couple of things around it. The first one I'll say is let's look at the common complaints people have with AI, and one of the biggest ones is AI can't ever create anything new. And you're saying, okay, technically, yes, it's entirely an aggregate of information that's received.
But that's what everything is. Everything is people just aggregating stuff and combining other things that they've seen before. And
it is, but there's a better argument than that. Like, yes, you're right, but the problem with that is that the argument becomes that's hard to define from like a philosophical argument perspective. There's a much easier argument, which is, okay, say it is only that. Say it can only combine things. Well, what if I gave you 3 things? How many different combinations could you get? And you're like, oh, there's not that many there from a combinatorics, 3x2 or whatever. So, okay, what if I gave you 3 colors, red, green, and blue? How many things could you make? How about everything you've ever looked at in your life? Because that's how monitors work, right? It's 3 colors. And the point is that a lot of people who have a naive understanding of this concept of mixing seem to think that it's just toggling switches. You can change a hat or whatever. The idea is it's much more than that. And I think I'm more predisposed as a person to be interested in AR than in AI than most people, for one reason more than anything else, which is I am very much a I have a lot of interests and I'm mediocre at a lot of things. Now I'm mediocre at a lot more things than most people.
You're very okay at stuff, a lot of stuff.
Yeah. Jack of all trades.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, let's say more of a I don't know what's less than a jack, but just slightly. But yes, there's a lot of trades that I know a good bit about. But what this does is it can I have a particular skill, which is when I work with people in a company, I can often find multiple things that are not how they should be. So even though my area, I might be hired to be a DBA or something, I'll come in and go, I can tell your graphic designer is not classically trained, or they are trained in art, but they've never done UX design. And I can tell from the way they're placing buttons, because I have a moderate understanding of from color to UI to UX to marketing to text copy to to designing apps to state machines to performance to caching systems. So I know a little bit about lots of things, and I have a good understanding of how those things work. And my point is, I have a very hard time communicating with people where I'm trying to use information saying in this other field, take the TV show Arcane. I could talk about Arcane, and someone's like, I want to make something like Arcane. And I'll be like, okay, let's match their art style. Oh, what's their art style? Oh, it's kind of like a painterly thing. I said, no. If you actually understand, they are using multiple different things. For example, the architecture is using the differences between Art Deco and Art Nouveau. Now, if you don't know art, you might not know what that means. But they're not just using it, they're also using it thematically from a story perspective, because one group is using Art Nouveau, one's Art Deco, and the actual historical origins of that art style specifically was designed to represent industrialization. It was, as technology changed, they moved from one art style to another as a way of advertising the value of automation and making things simpler. And so as the show is about improvement in automation, the thematics of the actual storyline match up with the artistic style choices. And these are the kinds of things that the average person won't know unless they have 2 or 3 different fields. Now, why do I bring all that up? Because a video game is like 5,000 jobs. To be really good, theoretically, you would want a really good scriptwriter, a really good game designer, a really good UI designer, and there's too many things. And a lot of people say that it's sort of cheating or giving up, but the way I look at it is, imagine being able to have a conversation with somebody who can be cross-disciplinary. And as someone who is cross-disciplinary, and I see the value I add to projects, I see it as the same thing. So I don't think AI, in the way that people are describing, are going to, quote unquote, make a game, because I just don't think it works that way. I think what's going to happen instead is that one person will be able to do more jobs, because it means when they onboard a project, they can learn a lot about a couple of areas and skip other areas and learn just enough to get it good enough. And the way I look at it, people go, oh, that takes people out of jobs. But I think a much better example is, I want to get an idea out of my head into someone else's. And this is my last note, because I know I could go on forever, is imagine I'm trying to make something. And what I'm trying to make represents my life experience. I have been to a place when I was younger. I saw a thing. I had a moment in my life I want to encapsulate in a video game. And so how do I do that? I have to internalize that idea, figure out how to phrase it in my own head. So I have to have a good mental model of how to visualize things. I have to then write that down or something that I can structure it. So I have to be good at structuring systems and sentences. I have to then use good visual language to describe the details that explain what that is. I then have to translate that to somebody else who now has to read that. And I have to hope they understand or have... Do they know what that kind of tree is? Have they ever been to that part of the country? Do they know what I mean by that? And so my point is, this is a very lossy transmission. To get an idea out of my head into someone else's head requires me to distill and rewrite something 20 times, then give it to someone else who then does the same thing on the way back in. And then, so when you say, oh, I want to hire an artist to make a concept art for me, you're going to lose 90% of what you're trying to get across in that entire process. And that's why there's a lot of iteration, a lot of cost in development. And then multiply that by 10 people on a project. How many individual concepts and ideas do you have to split? Because you could have somebody who's really passionate about music, but they can't get across the idea they want because only 2 people there speak music, right? And that's this frustrating part. If you have this universal translator, this Babelfish concept that understands what everyone's talking about in all of their language, it becomes this thing that branches everyone together by letting me take the philosophy and understanding I have of the world, the architectural understanding I have, and talk to someone who doesn't know architecture by translating the themes and concepts into musical scores and to ideas of what they're trying to get across. And so I think it'll be vital to the production of really high quality stuff, but not because it replaces work, but because it acts as a way of communicating ideas in a way that's far more efficient and far more visual, that I can go and say, I want to take inspirations from these different things. And the example I did is when I was designing my own character for something, I wanted to take the Arcane style and the Disney style, and I could literally, and I mean this literally as in I used Comfy UI, I can dial in 0.4% Disney. And what does Disney mean? Well, if you're talking to an artist, you don't really know what that means. Disneyfication is slightly wider eyes, slightly rounder jawline, slightly smaller chibi forms. And it's like, there's specific artistic principles that you'd have a really hard time describing. No, I want this, but I want it to be a little bit more in the Marvel-y. What does that mean? Like, you know what that means intrinsically, but you can't describe it. And so being able to literally blend these things and communicate as this bridge is a really interesting way to communicate the ideas. And so, conclusion, I think AI will be a very, very big part of a lot of creative works in a way that all of this conversation about AI replacing jobs will be comically quaint in the future. But I don't think it'll be because of what people think. It won't be because it replaces all the jobs, and it won't be because it'll be a magic button where you type something and get what you want, because I think the truth is somewhere in the middle, where it'll become more of a translator between people, and you'll still want to have somebody be a project manager. And yes, their work will be slightly lessened because they'll be relying more on the art and generation. But I truly believe it's going to be people at almost every phase. People requesting stuff, people producing it, people reviewing it, and possibly taking it in. And as a final, on like my self example, the logo on my website is my new branded logo. The first thing I did is I generated 4 logos. And it's in my Discord for people who've seen. The ones that I generated look nothing like what I made. But it gave me I was basically testing AI to say, do I want my logo to be forward facing, or do I want it to be in portrait, or which direction? And I was just looking at the shapes it made. And once I had a shape design language that I had an inspiration for, I took that and I moved it into Inkscape. Well, actually, technically, I first moved it into Affinity. Affinity, I would then I redrew the lines, painted stuff, I moved it around, and I liked it. But there's limitations on curve manipulation. Inkscape is really good for things like smoothing and manipulating curves, and so I modified it there. And once I had that designed, I moved into Figma, and then in Figma I made multiple variations, tested color theory, did different switches on stuff, and modified it. And so the end result, all AI did was work as a communication language for me to get ideas out and kind of work on ideas. So that's where I think AI is going to land. It'll be a bridging tool for people who actually want to be creative, and people who make lazy stuff out of it is fine. But to me, that's like saying, the example I've been using is, if you give a drum set to a child, you're not going to say, oh, I hate drum sets, they always ruin noise. They ruin silence. They make everything noisy. It's like, is it really the drum set that made the room noisy, or was it the fact that you gave a drum set to a child, right? And so if you give the world infinite creativity, and a lot of people haven't learned or respected the creative tools, they're going to make a lot of noise. And that's what the world is right now. The internet has a lot of noise made by children banging drums. And the really creative people out there are still going to make songs. I just don't see that as a problem.
Andrew, were you going to say something there?
No, I was just scratching my nose.
I'll say,
I mean, to me, it sounded, to be honest, like you were just explaining that game designers will be able to make games and not need to have other developers around. like
Okay, well,
the whole
maybe
goal is like that the system generates the things for you. The designers can get those things out. And I mean, of course, there'll be a point. There's going to be some interim where there's engineering required to get the things right, but it's got to eventually get to the point where designers are able to just tell the system what they want, iterate and modify it, and they don't need to worry about or think about the underlying code and the low-level stuff, because it's been solved enough times that the AI already has figured out what the optimal solution is for, this is a side-scrolling game, and it's figured out the optimal solutions for all of the stuff that you have there, and we don't need
I completely
programmers
disagree.
going in there. I mean, I don't think it's going to happen in the near time, but I don't see how it could not happen in the future. And I feel like it's a lot like there's some people mentioning, game engines being cheating and stuff, and not having to code your own physics systems and all those things being solved problems. I don't see why core input and gameplay loops for like 90% of games can't be solved problems as well. Obviously,
I can tell you why. I can very easily tell you why. The reason why is because intrinsically, this is a communication problem. This is what I was saying about it being a Babelfish. Here's the part that I truly believe. I genuinely believe this in my heart more than anything else, is that this will fail for the reasons that people don't understand what this technology is. This technology isn't a tool to make things. It is not a tool to make things. It is simply a way of taking human semantic language and converting it into something else, into a community. It's this interim connection. And what that means is it's only as good as the context. And I'm not talking about context as in the text inside the model. I mean literally your ability to describe what you're doing. And what a lot of people are going to find out very soon as a professional communicator is most people suck at communication. And the thing is, the limitation isn't the tool. And you're right. Theoretically, the world you're describing could happen, but it won't. And the reason it won't is because it's a skill in and of itself to communicate. And communicate ideas is very different. There's a reason there's not a lot of great teachers. We all know that a lot of teachers in our lives.
Good designers can do that. I mean, that's what you described there, and the whole thing was being a good game designer.
Oh, it is.
That's
Yeah,
like
but
what a good
what I'm
game
saying,
designer does is communicate all that stuff well to
No,
the
yeah,
engineering
but
team
you're
and the
wrong on-
design team, the art team, and document it and stuff.
No, yeah, but you're wrong because you're not talking anymore about one job. A designer from this perspective, you're describing someone who takes on the role of all of it. And my example is, if I say to you, I am
doing a game design job, right? They're
no. Again, I firmly disagree because, like, look at the example. If I said I am going to I have not given you enough context to finish that sentence. No matter how good you are at what you're doing, I've not.
If you tell me I'm gonna do game design, you've given me enough.
No, what I'm saying is, if I said I have a sick dog and I'm going to it's going to be vet, right? The idea is that there's not enough context. So look at it from my perspective. What I'm getting at here is that if you have a designer designing gameplay, yes, they could be really good at communicating gameplay ideas. But if you're designing a game, like a finished game, the actual parameters of that problem are going to be based on what platform am I delivering on? What are the limitations in terms of processor speed, all the way up to what is the gameplay, who's playing it, am I targeting certain kinds of people? I'm saying that one person, rarely, and this is a very small, humble brag, it's one thing I'm good at. Like, I'm actually not as good at things that people think I am, but the thing I am good at is this intersection of various different things. And most people suck at it. Like, literally most of my job in most companies I go to is being a translator between people who are simply missing each other on a really obvious piece of information. And I've seen some of the smartest people I've ever met make really stupid decisions because they're really good at one thing and they don't understand the other world. Where programmers, and you've seen this yourself, programmers who can't speak business people who can't speak programmers, and they're genuinely trying to work together, but they get into arguments and projects stop, all because they're saying the right thing, but they're not saying it in the language of the other person. And what you're describing.
What's your designer idea that you think a designer wouldn't be able to get across? So I guess, like, with that, just getting on, what is it that you think a designer wouldn't be able to communicate to an AI or something else that would need a programmer to be there as a middleman always, that we couldn't just remove?
The classic phrase, relevant XKCD, well, now it's obviously slightly different now, but the principle is that original comic of saying, I want you to make me an app. Okay, what does it do? Well, it shows when I hold up my camera, it shows the map and shows me where I am in the world or what particular place. Okay, I can do that. That'll give me a team of 2 people in a week. And then it's like, okay, but now I wanted to recognize a bird. I said, okay, that then.
You sound like a bad designer, though. This is a designer that hasn't thought through the thing and just throwing shit out randomly. But, like,
no, what I'm saying is that the amount of individual pieces of knowledge you need to have to make something properly, you need to understand all of the aspects of what you're making, and most people don't have most skills. And so it's like you're really assuming that someone is, because with AI can make whatever you give it based on enough context and information. And what I'm saying is somebody who is a really good game designer will not have the context to correctly describe how to appropriately create the right architecture that would match the era of what they're doing. Or
why would they need to if the system doesn't? So if you're building a first-person shooter, the architecture for most first-person shooters is generally the same. Some are better than others, and some are drastically better than others. But if it's just building towards the optimal that fits for most first-person shooters, and then you're just telling it where to change, the designers in there iterating relatively live, telling it where to change things and how to change things. And I think about this a lot, like in non-coding game editing systems where they're basically doing this kind of like in modding type setups. If it's the same kind of thing, but they can now do everything and it's not just what's predefined on the modding, I still feel like it's gonna like just empower designers to be able to build things either without engineers or with less engineers. And I don't think it's anytime soon, don't get me wrong. Like, but I can't imagine like 30, 40 years from now, people are sitting around still writing code in the same way or anything near similar. Imagine it'll be just as different as when we look at people that were doing punch cards, 40, 50 years ago back then, and it's going to be drastically different now. We might just have a chip in our head and the designer just thinks what they want and the thing comes out.
Chip.
Right. Okay, well, how about
yeah, one of those, right, Andrew?
I
pull
believe
that.
there will be different, but I don't want a chip in my head. Unless it's like a
Let-
chip that like gets rid of parasites and viruses and cures cancer.
That's what it does, Andrew.
that probably will happen. Yeah, but I will say, let's call that a beer bet then between you and I, in like in 20 years, because I'm still willing to bet that I'm right on this. And if you want my like last note and why is yes, like we've gotten better at a lot of things, but let's be real, a lot of scripts for a lot of movies suck. Movies are pretty bad at the moment, and the thing is, writing as an industry hasn't changed in a very long time. It's just a more old field. It has had a lot more knowledge and more writing.
I think it's gotten too easy to get into.
Yeah, so it's weird. It's almost like, despite the fact that the skills of writing have lived for thousands of years, it's weirdly not translated across fields to things like games for some reason. It's almost like it isn't as simple as taking all the information and applying it to something else. It's almost like there's a level of understanding required to bridge gaps and to build things and to blend individual different things together, because that's harder than people realize. You can't just give someone all of the writing in the world and they'll instantly become a good game designer. And if you want my last bit on that, I can prove this again very simply. My favorite game of the year so far is one called 1000 X Resist. I just finished it recently. It's a recent game. Well, I think recent, it's slightly older. And I say that despite the fact that it fails at almost every metric I've ever complained about here on this show before. It has god-awful level design, god-awful color theory. Its general like story design in terms of how the narrative and stuff works is absolutely horrible. But what it does do is it does something interesting in games for the first time I've seen in years. Why? Because I felt something was off about this. Its writing was really interesting in a way I've never seen in a game in a very long time. It's like, why is this interesting writing despite everything failing? Like, they're using Unity assets I recognize. It's like bad art, and like the animator is terrible. Like, why is this compelling in a way that I can't describe? Turns out the creators of this game were theater kids. They're theater kids that made like stage plays where they would do cinematic lighting and like dramatic poses, and they understand how to tell stories using body language and posing, and how to like slowly drip feed information in a very compelling way. And so what I was really watching was an interactive stage play, which is something that I'd never seen before. And what it highlighted to me is these people had no skill in level design, game design stuff, but they were able to take the skills they did have, and it wasn't a quote unquote good game, but it was a good gaming experience. And that highlighted to me that there is this cross blending of skills that'll be allowed by tools like AI, which allows you to bring in your skills from something else and communicate in the language of a game engine or whatever, is very compelling. But it also highlighted to me that no amount of that skill, because they had great writing or great setting with them, like the stage setting was amazing. They had really good blocking, but blocking only works if the camera's in a certain place, which isn't as reliable in a game engine. So they didn't understand the limitations of that. But more importantly, they also failed at color theory, because the color on stage is about bright static lights that have set things up, but it actually leads to really gaudy and horrible imagery when you talk about screenshots, which is why when I first saw the game, I looked over it because it looked garbage. It looked like a cheap asset flip, but it didn't have to. But the actual gameplay is far beyond that. So my point is, as a cross-disciplinary person, there's a lot of individual skills that go into this stuff, and people are going to bring theirs to the table. But there's always going to be some need of people to bridge those gaps and understand it. And AI is really good at communicating between them, but what it is only good at is communicating, providing both parties provide enough information to really get their ideas across. And so the bottleneck is not going to be the AI, and it's not going to be the skills. It's going to be the communication layer between, can people take their knowledge, convert it into context that can be fed to the AI, so the AI can communicate between both people. And so the limit will be communication skills. And in my opinion, most people suck at communication. And so that's going to be the limit, no matter how much you say in future anything.
Yeah.
So prompt engineering.
I'll take you up on that 20-year bet, and we'll
Totally
definitely have a beer and somewhere, whatever the countries are in 20 years.
Yeah.
If they're still around.
Yeah.
Maybe Ireland will be part of America.
Well, if I can respond to Jason, you were talking about like factoring in limitations and things. So when I was generating my game ideas for those learning objectives for Legends of Learning, I asked it to take into consideration the age range, grade level for the learning objective, but also the fact that it was a WebGL game written in Unity with a build size that had to be less than 30 megabytes and have to run well on low-end Chromebooks. And in its reasoning for the different ideas that it gave me, it factored it. Well, this will work well because it's just 2D sprites with this, and so, I mean, it does seem to be able to aggregate from a lot of different sources to understand a lot of parameters, as long as you can, like you said, express them well. So it comes down to prompt engineering, I guess.
Although there's even a limitation on that. I don't want to get it under further, but the common test right now is you have a shape that moves with bouncing balls inside of it. And this is what they're using the test reasoning models right now. And one of the most interesting side effects that came out of testing the recent reasoning models is the smarter models fail the test more often. Why? Because the test fundamentally is pretty simple. It's build a shape, put some bouncing balls in it, balls bounce against the surfaces, and try to make it work. But what the reasoning models do is, like a real person does, and why a lot of us fail to produce projects, is they overthink the problem, and by the end of it, the reasoning has talked themselves out of how gravity works, and they literally change the way the gravity functions, because like a real person cycling a problem for too long and overthinking it, they end up overthinking it and making a mess of their design and architecture. So it's funny how it's teaching us a lot about how it maps onto human reasoning. And so legitimately, yes, that's true, but this is why it's such a hard thing, because as a person, again, who tutors a lot, some people I meet, I have to understand that person is prone to overthinking, and I have to prompt them into no, simplify, let's reason it out into just the easiest way. Other people are opposite. They think very simply in broad strokes, but I have to teach them, no, you need to focus on the small details. And so there's a lot more nuance in the educational portion than just context. It's context aware to who you're talking to. And so again, it's a teaching tool, in my opinion. It's a teaching problem as a limitation.
Yeah, and you touched upon that, like prompting them and reasoning it out. So it's iterative, right? And you want to start with small iterations, and it gets better and better usually as you keep iterating. And this isn't just theoretical for me, because at work, we've been given a mandate from the top down that we need to integrate AI into every aspect of our workflow, from, design and planning, feature iteration, styling, testing, everything. So it's actually expected that we will ask for every task, how can I use AI to make this faster and better? And we have Zoom channels for everything AI, where if you're doing something with AI or you've done something with the AI, we're expected to post, hey, I did this. Here's how I prompted it. Here's what it gave me. And then especially if there's something that didn't work, so we can kind of swarm on it and say, well, how can we do this better? So yeah, they're expecting that we will be integrating AI into every aspect of our workflow.
I expect that to be the future going forward too. We got to get going, guys. Yeah. But next week we can have a discussion on prompt engineering degrees. The future of college and learning. I think it'll be a lot of fun. All right. Thanks everybody for coming out. Don't forget to go check out the Magic Pig Games sale assets down below and the Infinity PBR assets. They're both linked down below in the description. And just subscribe.
Yeah, just a plug for me again, by the way. As I said, I'm currently looking for work. I'm on LinkedIn. Anyone wants to reach out to me there, go for it.
That's what I was just about to say. If you're looking for a game developer, somebody to program and do all kinds of stuff, including design work as well, and not just throw it all at AI, definitely reach out to Storey. The link for his Discord is also down below. And then you said LinkedIn. Is LinkedIn the best way to contact you if they wanted to do something they don't want to hop in Discord?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you want to pay for my Discord, I'd love that too. You can talk to me there. But if that's a barrier too far, like I said, just feel free to ping me on LinkedIn. And if you mention that you saw me on the Game Dev Show, you're more likely to get a response from me, because you can imagine there's a lot of horrible recruiters I'm ignoring that are like that. I have a few tricks I can tell when someone's a recruiter and I avoid it. So if you mention that you saw me here, you're more likely to get a response from me.
All right. Sounds good. Well, yeah. Thanks again, everybody. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you again next week. Bye.